Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you hear me well. I'm going to try to be quick so that you can have your lunch. So I'm the only one stopping you now from having your lunch, so I'll try to be quick. So I decided to focus on a specific area of management, which is something that I've been working on and doing all my life, which is management of technological innovation, which obviously is related to change. So instead of taking general management and leadership concepts, I try to focus on management of technological innovation. So who are we? So we are a Swiss company. You see I have a Swiss flag, so I'm actually very Swiss. I know I don't look Swiss, but I eat cheese fondue and chocolate every day. And I've been in Switzerland for 40 years and did Swiss Army, so believe me, I'm very, very Swiss. And I come from the IT industry. So this is an industry that has been seeing a lot of changes, as you know. And one of the things we talk about in change management and innovation is disruptive technology. So a disruptive technology is something that is really a game changer. You were doing things in a certain way, there was a certain technology, and suddenly it's completely different. I can give you some examples. For example, about Tesla. So Tesla, they make electrical cars. It's a game changer compared to fossil fuel cars. We have here in my field, can we just press the play? In my field, which is water treatment now, I'm trying to show, for example, that traditional water that is used in industrial applications will stick to metals. And one of the things we do is we do what is called film-forming chemicals. And I just want to show you when this gentleman is going to take the next pipe, that this pipe has been treated with our chemicals, and you see the behavior of water on this pipe. You see the water just, flows away. So this is something that can be considered a game changer, because one of the things that is important about disruptive technologies is the fact that these technologies really, the measure of success and how you measure the effectiveness of things changes. So for example, in cars, we have been studying emissions, CO2 emissions and so on. Of course, if you have an electrical car, you're not going to be measuring emissions anymore. Well, with water treatment, something similar. You were measuring, for example, oxygen, which is what you have in sparkling water, for example, which is corrosive. Well, you're not going to be measuring oxygen anymore. So in a similar way, disruptive technologies, it's a game changer. You have to measure different things, and really everything is changing. Now, how do you manage innovation? How you manage change with disruptive technologies? So because Dr. Rashid, I saw he's a prolific writer and he loves books, I decided to deal with this subject to deal with this, giving you a kind of a book review. So I wanted to give you a view of the books that kind of shaped my career, my professional career. And as Dr. Rashid said, you should be reading biographies, you should be reading a lot. And I came actually from a very technical background. I was a nerd, when I was 15, I was programming. So I didn't know much about leadership and about management in general. So I read a lot. One of the things that everyone must read when you are talking about change and change management is a book written by a Danish gentleman, so somebody from the Nordics, called Chris Christiansen, who is a professor at Harvard, which is called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he describes the concept of disruptive change and how innovations are being implemented. And his basic idea is that any innovation is always implemented or always introduced in the same way. You have some early adopters, people who start, or they like technology, or they get a benefit from the innovation, the disruptive technology. So these people are called the early adopters. I would say today Tesla is probably in the world of early adopters, right? Then you have people who are an early majority, so people who start to use certain things, but they kind of followed a little bit the early adopters. And then at some point, people become the late majority, and then it's the laggards. I would say the late majority are people, I don't know, who might be switching to smartphones. I saw, the other day I saw somebody next to me, he still had one of these older Nokia phones, so I guess he's a laggard. I would say he's a laggard. So this is just to give you a view on the cycle of technology. Now, how we go about, all of these steps, of innovation and adoption of technology. So this goes back to the part of my discussion, which is about more general management. So first of all, so I'm going through all these different books, and I will give you one or two anecdotes about each book. So one of the most important leaders, I think, in the last 40s, 50s centuries is Jack Welch, who was, the successful CEO of GE when GE was considered, a successful organization. So it was some time ago. So Jack Welch, he wrote this book. And what is very interesting about this book, I learned, I think, maybe 3 things from this book. One of the things was you have to set stretch goals. Stretch goals. So you ask your people, what is the goal that you can set for yourself? And let's say you add 10, 20%. So, if they tell you I can sell 100 Tesla cars, you tell them, well, I want you to sell 120. Because even if he's achieving only 80% of his stretch goals, well, it's still more, right? So he was putting these stretch targets on people so that people do better than what they think themselves they can do. That's the one very important point. A second very important point that he makes in his book is, a deal is not done until it's done. So this is very important because, again, you are dealing with change. And, he describes 2 times, I think, General Electric tried to sell a division to Philips. And he sent his people from the United States to Holland to sign all of the agreements. And everything he signed is just the board has to approve it. And the board didn't approve it. And so they had to renegotiate. He sent another team from the United States. And again, the board didn't approve it. And in the end, the board did a deal with another company, the Philips board. And this is Philips and GE, right? So it's not done until it's done. So this is a very, very important point he's making. Another point he's making is, succession. Who are your next leaders? And it's very interesting because he describes his approach. So he would meet with his top people and tell them, suppose you and I are on a plane tomorrow and we die. The plane crashes and we die. Who you think should lead the organization? And I think this is a very interesting approach. So you're taking yourself out of the equation. You're taking the person who is sitting with you out of the equation, so there are no rivalries. There is no jealousy anymore. We are both dead, right? Who is the right person? And this gives you a very interesting way of dealing with succession. Another important point is how do you deal with your engineers? And we talked about the Swedish approach that you can be open and talk about things. So Mr. Honda, is very interesting because his engineers, obviously he's an engineering genius, right? But at some point later in his career, his engineers were secretly doing air-cooled engines. And all the combustion engines before, they were based on water cooling, and which is very complex. But for lighter engines, like for motorcycles, you can't use water cooling, to keep the motor cool. So the engineers, they were secretly working on this air cooling, and they were afraid to tell him. But eventually, he listened to them, and this is how Honda became the leader in air-cooled motors. So it's not that Mr. Honda had this brilliant idea. No, this idea didn't come from him. He never believed in it. But somehow he listened to his people. Another very interesting and very important point that you have to have, and I'm giving you all these books that I've read through my career, and I think they are wonderful books, and you should try to get them and read them. They are all available on Amazon. I got the pictures from the Amazon website. So this is the founder of Sony. Actually, there were 3 founders, but what I found very, very interesting about this book is 2 points. One of the points is that this gentleman, we are talking Japan after World War II, right? After Pearl Harbor, after Japan was destroyed. And with just 2 or 3 of his colleagues, they founded Sony. And Sony became reasonably successful, building from the ashes in Japan. Sony became reasonably successful in Japan, but it was just a Japanese company. So this gentleman did something amazing. He took his wife and his 3 or 4 kids, and he decided to relocate to the United States. And he moved to New York. He bought an apartment on Park Avenue. And you know that in New York, there is the Sony building, right? So Sony became a household name in the United States. It's one of the most famous brands in the United States because this gentleman, the founder, he decided to move himself in the United States and make it in America. And I think this is incredible ambition, coming from a Japanese guy who had, just come from a country that had been destroyed by World War II. So I think it's a very interesting story. The other thing that I really liked about this book is, the way that at some point the Japanese yen becomes so expensive. So there was this currency wars in the 70s and 80s that the Japanese products became so expensive that actually he was the first one to think global, and he started manufacturing in the United States. So, and he decided that to be successful, he had to really be local, act local, and give people jobs there and manufacture in the United States. And this was a very innovative idea then. Another thing which is very important, and we talked about Sweden, where they tell you, we are in December, let's do a meeting in March. Well, I don't believe in this. And obviously, in technological management and innovation, you can't do that. So Peter Drucker, who's believed to be one of the biggest leaders and thinkers in management, he believes that the effective executive is the executive who always has time. So the effective executive is an executive that has his organization so well organized that it doesn't really need him. So he has time, and he has empty space in his agenda to take care of the things which were not expected. Because, of course, the things which were expected have to be managed, taken care of. There has to be a process. So the leader, the effective leader, he has time on his hands to deal with the things that he was not expecting, right? And, of course, you always have your favorite book. So, I describe these different books, and they tend to speak about a specific subject. But when Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and obviously I come from the IT industry, so Microsoft and Bill Gates are very important people, he was asked, what is your favorite business book? And his favorite business book was Alfred P. Sloan's My Years at General Motors. So Alfred P. Sloan was the head of General Motors, who makes Cadillac and all of these wonderful cars in the 50s and 60s. And he describes in this book, I would say, everything. So how to have good people, how to deal with decision-making, how to, maybe give some shares to your people, how to do general management. So he's the ultimate general manager. And in his book, he describes one anecdote, which I really enjoy, which is that, they gave, at some point, the board told the people, okay, we need to have a company in Europe. So why don't you go to Europe and buy a company? So, this team went to Europe, and they found this German car manufacturer that they wanted to buy. And it was in the 50s, and they said, well, we need $10 million. So they telexed Alfred P. Sloan in the US, and they told him, we need $10 million to buy this company. So what do? So Alfred P. Sloan responded by telex, saying, well, the board has asked you to find a company. And if you think this is the right company, and you think this is the right price, the money is available, right? So what did these guys do? They canceled the deal. Because he purely put the responsibility on their shoulders, right? And then they acted as if it was their money. And did they really believe that this was the best company and this was the right price? No, they didn't. They just were trying to do something, right? So he didn't say no. He just put it on their shoulders, which I thought was a great anecdote. So I'm okay. And of course, if you had to read one book and you are not a very big reader, so you can take this 30, 40-page book, which is called Who Moved My Cheese? It's a very funny book. It's about two mices, two little mices, and they are used to go and eat cheese in the same place all the time. And suddenly somebody moved their cheese. Oh my God. So this is change. This is a book about change. How do we behave when there is a change, right? We are surprised, we have to act, we have to find solutions. So all of these different things that we do when there is a change. It's a very, very thin book, easy to read, very entertaining. So I recommend it.